It's nice to have you back, Jack.
Good to be back, sir.
You've got to stop doing that. I work for a living. Well, not really, not anymore, but there we go. Right, we're now into Vietnam.
Yes.
So, March 66. Can you remember, I mean, were you're now trained as a helicopter pilot. You're in the US Army. It's 1966. This sounds like a very silly question. But was there any doubt in your mind that you might not go? Because although Vietnam, huge conflict, but the US military back home is huge too. So, I mean, was there a chance that, well, actually, I might not go. I might be required to stay on home soil. And also, did that thought ever cross your mind? And also, can you remember when you actually got the piece of paper or the telephone call or whatever it was that says, you're off? Just, we'll start there. Tell us about that.
Well, in my mind, I was going to go. It was many of my friends had already gone, and I said, "Look, I'm off. I got to go do it," and it was probably a month before I actually left America that I received the notification. It wasn't a telegram. It was just a letter saying that my next assignment was where it was going to be and where to report and how to do it and how to get going and all the appropriate instructions for movement. And I was expecting it, and sure enough, it came.
Sure. And how did you actually get over to Vietnam? Was that on a C-47?
I believe it was a commercial charter flight that the government had chartered an aircraft for a group of us going over. So we all went over to went with other guys that were going over to Vietnam, and it was rather than being a commercial flight to on American Airlines or something like that, it was a charter flight by some unknown company that I'd never heard of before, but that the government had chartered to take us on that flight.
You find yourself D Troop, 3rd Squadron, 4th Cavalry.
Yes.
25th Infantry Division, and we mentioned earlier the insignia, am I right in saying that? Of the 25th is the electric strawberry, it's known as.
That's right. We have, sometimes we have sayings in the service about things that we do or things that we've done or organizations, and that was one of the kind of the side jokes about, well, what unit are you assigned to? Oh, I'm assigned to the electric strawberry, as opposed to saying the 25th Infantry Division Tropic Lightning. Because you look at it, it does look like an electric strawberry because essentially it's a taro leaf with a lightning bolt down the middle of it, and we of course nobody else should make fun of it, but we who are assigned to the division were allowed to exchange pleasantries and laugh amongst ourselves about where we were assigned.
Well, it's certainly unforgettable, as is the next story, because you hit the ground running, so to speak.
Yes.
Yeah, your training was somewhat lacking. Not your flight training, not your training as a pilot,
no.
But given the fact that you were in the US Army, you're still in the US Army, your infantry training had perhaps lagged behind a bit.
Well, I would say my training in weaponry was because I had been training in the old M1 Garand rifle. I'd fired that many times and had qualified for marksmanship awards, etc., and how to clean it and how to put it, how to disassemble it, how to take care of it. But the Army at that point realized that trying to carry a heavy, long rifle like that in the jungles of Vietnam was just impossible. So they designed and came up with the M16. I think some people now know it as the AR-15 in civilian use, and it was a much shorter, much lighter. It was made out of plastic and metal as opposed to wood and metal, and so therefore it was being issued because of the urgent needs of the soldiers in Vietnam. It was not being issued stateside at all. So when I arrived,
that's interesting. I didn't know that.
I had no training, if you will, in this new weapon we had. So on my first convoy out of the cantonment area where I arrived in country up to my duty station, I was riding with a young soldier, and he says, he hands me this plastic thing, and I said, oh, this is the M16. I've never seen one of these before. And so he said, well, you use magazines. Said, he was very polite, and he said, sir, do you know how to load a magazine? Because I was very quizzical about the weapon I had in my hands. So I said, oh yes, I know how to load a magazine. So I loaded the rounds that we had in the magazine, and then I said, okay, well, I seen the slot in the bottom is where it goes, and I pushed it in there, and then I said, how do you charge the weapon? Because with the M1 Garand, it was very simple. It was you release a lever, and bam, it slams around home. Well, I was looking for a release lever, and so he showed me how to do it, and he said, I said, oh, he said, yes, it's now a hot weapon. All right, thank you. And he said, sir, on the way up in here, you see that little switch on the side? It says safe. I said, oh yes, I see it. Well, it's not pointing towards safe. And he said, I would suggest that you would put it on safe for our trip. I'm sure he felt that if I didn't put it on safe, I'd probably shoot him accidentally.
Yeah, not to be recommended. And,
no. And I told him, I said, specialist, if you ever tell anybody about what just transpired, there will be severe penalties. He said, gotcha, sir. My lips are sealed.
I saw nothing.
Right.
And it says you mentioned just when you arrived. I'm just picking up on this here. Big Peanut Field.
Yes.
This is presumably a nickname. This is a name. No.
No, it actually
Big
was.
Peanut Field?
It was a very open area because it had to become the cantonment area for a full infantry division with support units. So we have and in the American style of going to war, you have an artillery support group. You have, and we were in the cavalry support group, which means we did the reconnaissance for the division. So there were many other units other than just infantry soldiers that had to be contained. So this was a huge, I don't know how many acre, open peanut field that some poor Vietnamese farmer had been growing peanuts in for probably some number of years, which we took charge of as our cantonment area.
So it wasn't a nickname, it actually was a big peanut field.
It was a huge peanut field.
Right. Now, your primary mission was to secure the supply route between Saigon and, I'll try and get this right, Tay Ninh? Correct.
Absolutely perfect.
Right, okay, thanks for that. Because I know people will say in the comments that if I don't pronounce it right, so it's better to check. And then you're one of the first officers on the ground for D Troop in March '66.
Yes, we were what we called an advance party. There was about 4 or 5 of us, and we were responsible for the logistics of getting ready for our unit to arrive. They were coming over by boat, and we were several weeks ahead of them coming because they were still on the water coming in from the west coast of America.
So you weren't you weren't straight into a helicopter and straight into the combat zone at all, were you? Because
No.
let's not forget, you were although you're a helicopter pilot and a fixed wing pilot, you're in the US Army and you are in that huge, great big transportation, you know, so you're still part of that.
Yes.
And the next story, which I think is great, this is a good one. Probably, well, people probably won't expect something like this. You looked out for your troops, didn't you?
Yes, we
You
always.
were looking out. You were looking out for those guys that were coming on that boat.
Yep.
And you identified that they needed something which they did not have.
Right.
And you used your ingenuity in order to acquire it.
Well,
Cots.
as it turns out, we were provided in those days. We had wooden platforms to put our tents on to keep us up off the ground, and so we had all those the wooden platforms and all the tentage. So we were setting up the wooden platforms. We were setting up the tents, and then we realized, you know, when these guys get here, they're going to have to just sleep on these wooden platforms or on the ground. And we said, no, we're aviators. We don't do that. We can let the infantry do that, but the aviators, no. So I said, we need cots. So we took a 3/4-ton truck and we drove down to Saigon, where they had a huge warehouse of supplies for the military. And I went in there with my supply sergeant, and I said, "Okay, we're here. We need cots." Oh, yeah, yes, sir. The supply clerk there was very, very courteous, and he said, "Well, how many do you need?" And I said, "I think I need probably about 144." He looked at me like, "Oh, okay." So he said, "Well, and when we got to the part of the warehouse that had them, they were stacked to the ceiling with these cots all folded up. If you recall the canvas wooden cots that you've probably seen on television, that's what they were. They were wood structure with canvas covering to sleep on." So I said, "Oh, that'll be fine." And he said, "Well, before I can give those to you, sir, we have to have a requisition." I'm going, "Okay, all right." So I turned to my supply sergeant. I said, "Do we have a requisition for that?" And he said, "No, sir." I said, "Yes, we will." It's an 8-digit number, correct? I can remember that much from my days as a young lieutenant training. And I said, "Yes." Okay, 144 minutes. I think the number, our requisition for our unit is, and I rattled off an 8-digit number. Supply sergeant at the warehouse took down the number. He said, "Yes, sir, and you can load them right into your vehicle right now." So we loaded 144 cots into our 3/4-ton truck. I swear, probably to this day, there's probably a supply sergeant scratching his head, wondering, "I never ordered 144 cots against my requisition number."
But the troops got a good night's sleep.
Yes, and then after loading those 144 cots into a 3/4-ton truck, you think, well, a cot doesn't weigh very much. Well, when you get 144 of them, they do weigh a lot, and so we were stacked to the gills in the back of this 3/4-ton truck, and we were so heavy towards the rear that on the way back, which it was about probably a 20 or 30 kilometer drive back to the cantonment area where we were, literally the front end of the 3/4-ton truck, every time we kind of hit a bump or a rough spot on the road, the front wheels would sort of lift off the ground and then bounce back down because we were so heavy to the rear of the vehicle. And so we didn't exactly speed down the main supply route that day. We did it very slowly and very carefully so we wouldn't run off the road when the front wheels came off the ground, and it gave us no steering on the vehicle.
Right. Well, before we get on to, because there are now, we get on to the very serious business of combat stories. But before we do, just to put everything into perspective, we've talked about the helicopters that you've flown at this point.
Yes.
The Huey, have you been, because this is like early '66, have you been flying the Huey in America at this point? Have you had any training on this, or is this, just take me from there.
Right.
What is your first aircraft that you are flying in Vietnam?
It was the H-23D Raven, and that was what I was trained on when I transitioned from fixed wing to rotary wing, and that was the only aircraft I was legally qualified to fly in the Army. Was the H-23 Raven, a small bubble type helicopter, similar to what, to use an example like the MASH TV and movie series. You had a small aircraft like that, and this is essentially a more modern version of that MASH helicopter. A little bubble, two-seater, two passengers, or two occupants, and it was a single engine, single main rotor, single tail rotor, gasoline reciprocating inline 6-cylinder engine.
And this is in the reconnaissance role, because it's a light aircraft.
Very, very light, very thin aluminum, and its primary role was reconnaissance. However, because we were a cavalry unit, and an air cavalry unit, our particular H-23s had two M60 machine guns mounted on the skids, fixed weaponry, facing forward, so that if we wanted to recon by fire an area from the air, we had the ability to fire these two M60 machine guns at a tree line or something to see if we could flush somebody out. So normally, the H-23s would be unarmed. So we were if you will, we were on the vanguard of arming the helicopter force with these small, light H-23s that were armed.
Well, vanguard's putting it mildly, because you've just strapped two machine guns that you can't aim at anything onto the skids of a light helicopter, just on the off chance that you might be able to flush out the VC.
Yes.
I mean, okay.
And the only way you could aim them, because they were bolted down hard, was you had to aim your aircraft at what you wanted to shoot at. So you had to be flying towards the enemy to recon and by fire to flush them out.
So, qualified on the Raven, when do you start type converting onto other aircraft? Did you do that in your first tour?
Yes, we did that internally within the unit. We have IPs, or instructor pilots, assigned, and standardization pilots assigned to our unit. That's what they do. They train. They make sure that the new arrivals that come to the unit are properly trained in the aircraft that they're going to fly, and they check. You get a check ride with these IPs, and after about 6 months flying the observation scout recon H-23, I was asked our unit commander, I said, I'd really like to get into something just a little bit larger. So that's when I was transitioned by our unit into the UH-1 Huey, which was, there's been several movies made of the use of this helicopter in the Vietnam War. And as a little anecdote from an aviator, an old aviator, is that we said that when all the aircraft in the future have gone to the desert and the boneyard, the flyby of the last two aircraft will be a C-47 Dakota and a Huey.
So, first time in the Huey, tell us about that. The first time you go up.
Oh, well, after I was qualified, which normally was right around our cantonment area in the flight pattern, learning the characteristics and the flight characteristics of this new aircraft. They said, okay, you're qualified, and we'll now assign you a mission. So my first mission was a troop lift, because the Hueys that we were flying was what we call a slick. It didn't have any guns on it other than 2 door gunners, 1 on each side. Other than that, it was just a helicopter, and we were carrying troops or supplies.
Right, so sorry to butt in. I just want to ask a question here, because this is something that I didn't know, and I don't know very much. You referred to that aircraft as a slick, so it's not armoured, but it still had 2 M60s in it, door gunner each side.
Right.
And that was still referred to as a slick. So when we're talking about armoured Hueys, we're talking about Hueys with rocket launchers and all the other stuff, which presumably you flew later on.
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, all right. It's just for for anyone that's watching, just so that we can qualify exactly where you are. Please go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
Well, and we were going into what the individuals on the ground, the pathfinders on the ground, had indicated that they were ready to accept us into this landing zone. So we had probably 4 to 6 Hueys in trail landing in this zone loaded with troops to offload them so they could go seek out the enemy from this landing area. Well, they had indicated that they said, well, it's not a hot LZ, which meaning LZ meaning landing zone. It's not a hot.
Yeah.
It's not hot. It's not under fire. So we said, oh, okay, all right. So we approached it, and as we were touching down, we started taking fire from the tree line, which blew my windshield out. I go, well, this is hot LZ. I think it's a hot LZ. I don't care what you say, but I consider it to be a hot LZ. But anyway, they knocked my windshield out. So we offloaded the troops, flew back, and turned the aircraft over to maintenance and say, hey guys, fix the windshield, will you? So, and then on my second mission, same kind of a thing. We were hauling troops into a landing zone, and again, they said it's not a hot LZ. And I said, yeah, I remember that from last time. So I said, okay, let's be on the lookout, be aware. Okay, so we're most vulnerable just as we're touching down, because we're slow speed, we're just a few feet off the ground, and that's when we have to let the soldiers get out of our aircraft so we can get out of there. Just as we're touching down, some combatant from the other side shot my chin bubble out. And I said, well, okay, there's another cold LZ that's hot. So we went ahead, we took off, and nothing was damaged other than the chin bubble. They took it back to maintenance and they fixed it. But I was thinking to myself, wait a minute, what did I get myself into here? This is a much larger aircraft. It's more powerful. It holds, I'm carrying soldiers into the battle, which is what I was trained to do. And and all I'm doing is getting the aircraft busted up around me. So I asked my unit commander, I had flew it for probably about a month, and I asked our unit commander, I said, well, they're kind of making my days rather uncomfortable by knocking my windshield and my chin bubble out. How about, can I get into the gunships? Because we had gunships assigned. And he said, well, sure. So for my last 6 months or so in the country, I flew gunships. It was a AH-1C, which we called the Heavy Hog. It was heavy because I had 24 folding fin aerial rockets on each side of the aircraft and a 40mm automatic grenade launcher in the nose of the aircraft, which we lovingly called the chunker, because that's exactly what it sounded like whenever you fired it, because it was a reciprocating it was a boom, 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 chunk, chunk, chunk. And it was a slow firing, but very effective for an area type weapon.
And they were explosive 40mm grenades, weren't they?
Yes, they were.
Right. Were you piloting, and then the co-pilot is doing the firing of the rockets? How did it actually work in the cockpit of a Heavy Hog?
Actually, in the cockpit, helicopters are normally flown from the right seat, just because of their design. And the way the Army had set it out at that time, and as far as I know, they still do, the right seat is the pilot. The left seat in the front of the aircraft is the aircraft commander. He's the guy that's telling the door guns what to do. He's also telling the pilot, okay, here's where we're going to go. Which way direction are we going to go? Here's the target area. So he kind of coordinates the team that is on board that aircraft, because we had 4 people. We had a pilot, an aircraft commander, and 2 door gunners, one on each side, with we call it a free M60. Usually they were hanging from the overhead on a bungee cord, so they could swivel the M60 machine gun around to get at all angles to provide protection. Kind of like, I guess, what the old, it's kind of a spin-off of the concept of the old B-17s in World War II that had nose turrets and top turrets and side waist gunners and tail gunners and that sort of thing. Well, we didn't have that kind of firepower, but the concept still proved to be a good one, because they could provide protection for the aircraft as best we could, particularly after we were, because as a gunship, we were attacking a target. So we had to attack the target basically head on. But then once in the old story, never overfly your target. So we would break off our gun run short of the target. Meanwhile, while you're breaking off, you're essentially exposing your aircraft to the ground fire, because they know that you're not going to fire at them anymore. So they can pop up and start taking shots at us. So that's when the door gunners came in to provide the cover for us as we were breaking away from our gun run to go back and do like a racetrack and come back in and try it again.
So you're coming in. You're coming in for your gun run. You're firing your 40 millimeter. You're firing your what was the other gun you mentioned? Like a Gatling gun on the front of the.
No, actually, they were the only. We had the only gun, if you will, was the grenade launcher, which was capable of being controlled electrically, left, right, up, and down. So you could aim that. Where the rockets, they went off the trajectory. They were ballistic rockets. They were not smart. They were dumb folding fin aerial rockets that went. They went out of the launch tube, and where they went, sometimes they had a mind of their own. So basically, they went where you aimed it, and so
it was you were coming in, point and squirt. You've got the target in front of you. You let your rockets go. You can shoot your 40 millimeter grenades, but as soon as you peel off, so you stop firing, you'll peel off. That is the time that the enemy are going to pop up and say, right, well, we've now only got to deal with door gunners, so we can let go. And also, you're perhaps exposing slightly the underside of the aircraft as you're flaring away.
Exactly. Yeah, we become, when you're coming towards them, it's a fairly small silhouette. When you turn the aircraft belly up and start to move away, that becomes a rather large target for the guy on the ground to see.
The next thing here, there's a bit about your father-in-law, which we talked about your father-in-law earlier on in part 1. He's back in the story, so tell us about that then, because this is another funny one. Because it's not, I mean, this is serious stuff, but there's quite a few funny stories, isn't there, about this first tour in Vietnam?
Well, he was a full colonel. I was just young captain at the time, I believe, and I was flying along the main supply route as support for a convoy that was heading from Cu Chi to Tay Ninh. Well, one of the little villages that we go by is a place called Trang Bang, and Trang Bang was an area where occasionally we would, to avoid just sitting and burning blade time and burning fuel, we would say occasionally logger there or shut down, and wait to be called if there was a problem along the main supply route. And I was airborne, escorting this convoy, and I heard he was the commander of a of the 12th Aviation Group, which was basically the southern two provinces of Vietnam. He was the head helicopter guy. His group had all the non-divisional assets. In other words, the 25th Infantry Division had their own aviation elements, but when they had a big operation, they would supplement it with the non-divisional units. And those non-divisional units belonged to my father-in-law. And his call sign was Buffalo 6. And so I heard that this is, over the radios on the air-to-air frequency, Buffalo 6 departing Trang Bang, blah, blah. So, or maybe, I guess he was landing. He was landing at Trang Bang. He said, Buffalo 6 on approach to Trang Bang, just as a warning to other aircraft in the area that he was in fact going to land his helicopter, because he would have command and control of many hundreds of helicopters during a day. And have no idea why he was landing there at Trang Bang, but when I heard the Buffalo 6, I said, "Oh, Buffalo 6, this is Centaur 4-2. How are you doing?" He said, and he was very kind. All he said was, "I'm a little busy right now. I'll call you back later."
But you did meet up with him, didn't you, for Christmas in Saigon?
Yes, we kind of joke about the fact that many of the South Vietnamese, when they would go to an external post that was an outpost, so to speak, and they would take their families along with them. And I said, well, heck, if the South Vietnamese could do it, I could go with my family for Christmas. So I went over where he was located. It was, probably 20, 30 kilometers from where we were. So I took with my commander's permission, I borrowed a Huey and and flew over to his location, and we spent Christmas together. Of course, now he was I spent 2 or 3 days there, and what we did, of course, we never told the ladies until we got back, and many years later. But since, again, like I told you, he was observing and coordinating and supervising many combat assaults by many aircraft. Well, when I was there, it wasn't a day off for him. He was still doing his duty to control and supervise his men and aircraft. And so I went on several combat assaults with him. I was in the right seat, he was in the left seat, and we had a great Christmas time. But we looked at each other after we had done 2 or 3 of them. We said, "We're not going to tell the ladies, are we?" And I said, "No, we're not going to tell the ladies."
So you actually flew combat missions with your father-in-law
Yes,
in
I did.
Vietnam?
Yes, I did.
There's not too many people that can say that. And
Yeah.
there's a story here about the surrounding of Trang Bang village, isn't there?
Oh.
Which we really need to cover before we move on to the next section, which is actually not in Vietnam at all. So we'll cover this, and then I think we can have a very short break.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you can tell us about that one.
Yes, this was back when I was flying the H-23, before I got transitioned into Hueys, and it was, again, I was an aerial observer, a scout, a recon guy out. This was a battalion-sized mission with a fairly large group of 25th Infantry Division soldiers on the ground, doing a sweep of this little area called Trang Bang, this little town. And so we would normally fly in 2. So I had a wingman watching me, and I was watching him. And we were essentially doing orbits around this village of Trang Bang while the other 25th Division soldiers were working their way through this village. And so our mission was to make sure that, in case anybody started to try to escape the movement of the 25th Division soldiers, we were to take appropriate action to let them know that these people were on the run, and to try to stop them if at all possible. Well, as I was circling around, I saw a military-age individual running on a road, trying to escape from the village. So I went ahead and landed my. It was on a road, and he was running down this road. So I landed my helicopter on the road, crossways to it, and pulled up my 45, and gave the universal halt sign. He didn't stop, and as he kept running and running, well, I didn't. I'm not going to shoot somebody just because they're not stopping. Tried to. Several times they said, stop, and about that time, as he got very close to my helicopter, he wanted to duck underneath my tail boom area, and he was carrying what looked to me like a willow woven fish creel area, because of course obviously he's probably a farmer or maybe a fisherman, because there's lots of those in Vietnam. And so about that time, as he starts to duck under my tail boom, he pulls out an AK-47 and starts to swing it around to aim at me. Well, luckily, I had a wingman, and he saw what was happening, but he was behind as of the tail rope, so I was trying to look around to see what he was doing, and I lost sight of him. But all of a sudden, I heard a burp, burp, firing from an M16, an automatic, and and my wingman said, "Don't worry about him. He's no longer a threat."
I think in this day and age, they say he had been neutralized.
Okay, yes, he was quite neutralized.
Quite neutralized. And on that note, if we just take a break for a very, very short time, and then we'll come back.
All right. Thank you, sir. Right.
So, I know around about this time, March 67, your first tour comes to an end. But before we leave Vietnam for the first time, I appreciate that you can only give this from Jack Kempster's perspective. It was, Jack Kempster's perspective from Vietnam. America has at times been painted in a very bad light. Did you ever yourself experience what you would consider to be maybe not even war crimes, but inappropriate behavior, or have to justify or have to be a witness for something else that had happened? And also, how, when you were under fire, tell us about the authorization process behind that, which is there's two questions there, but yeah. I'll let you just answer it in your own way.
Okay. I never, ever saw, I would say, illegal, immoral, or wrong actions by the individuals that I worked with, and I was both officer or enlisted, that would possibly impinge upon the integrity of their service. I never was exposed to that. To follow on to that, flying an aircraft and a gunship or a slick or whatever I flew, particularly the gunships, when we would take fire from the ground, you can hear it, and we were flying low enough that a small arms rifle would be able to reach us, and even though I was able to observe an enemy combatant firing at me and maybe even hitting my aircraft, we were not allowed to fire unless we had authorization and permission to fire. And the way they did, there was a hierarchy of structure to where when I would have to call out to my superior, who would then coordinate with an individual who was coordinating with a local, let's say, like I would say he was like a constable or something like that, in this particular area that we were working on, and they would either say yes, you can fire at, or no, you can't fire, And even though it is actually very frustrating when I can see the enemy combatant, but I cannot return the fire. He's free to fire at me, but nope. I got to hold my weapons cold and do not go hot because you do not have permission to fire. And I observed that, and everybody who flew with me or anybody I flew, or we got our debriefs when we returned from our missions. That was often the common thread. I had them in my sights, but I didn't pull the trigger. So
what could you do? I mean, let's say all you could do, presumably, was just create distance. Because if you've got somebody walking down a road with an AK-47, 7.62 by 39 millimeter, technically it can bring down a helicopter.
Yes.
And I'm sure somebody will make a comment in the comments about situations where it has. Depending on where you hit it, and that's not actually something I've asked you about, so I'm going to do that in a moment. I'm going to sneak another question in there about helicopters being brought down purely by small arms fire and what the incoming fire was. But if you saw somebody just pull out an AK and start firing at your helicopter, presumably then all you could do was just create distance and pull away.
Exactly. That was. We'd have to stand off until we get permission to return the fire. Of course, you can imagine the, I'll just use the word, the bureaucracy of trying to get that approval it wasn't in the matter of seconds or even minutes. It was maybe in terms of 15, 20 minutes, a half an hour or more before you could get permission to fire. Well, by that time, the enemy combatant would, he'd figure out that, okay, well, I've done what I can do. I'm going to go hide, and so therefore, trying to then, okay, where did he go? He's not there. He's not where he was when he fired at me. So what am I going to do now? Well, I got permission to fire. Well, he's gone. Thanks very much for the permission, but I'm not going to pull the trigger.
It's not even worth asking in that scenario, is it? You just pull off because
pull off and head home.
Pull off and head home because it's a pointless exercise. But was it? I mean, we all know that the Viet Cong carried, amongst other things, AK-47s and the Russian SKS. But when it came to anything heavier, did they have any kind of rocket propelled grenades? Because we see their use, and I appreciate that you weren't there, but we associate that with Afghanistan and where the RPG-7 was used a lot. Did they have anything like that to fire at you that was more than just small arms fire?
Only when we encountered the North Vietnamese soldiers coming down the Ho Chi Minh Trail and making incursion into South Vietnam, did we ever encounter anything heavier than a 7.62 small arms fire, and that was the ZSU-23, a 23 millimeter anti-aircraft system on a tracked vehicle. But they were very rare to be encountered, and as you might say, as in a thin aluminum helicopter, they were nothing to mess with. We would call in the fast movers, the Air Force, to take care of that, as we were incapable of returning fire with a 23 millimeter anti-aircraft weapon that was designed to take out aircraft such as us.
Yeah, it's not the place you want to be, is it?
It's kind of a non-starter, as we would like to say, to get involved in that kind of a firefight, because the enemy combatant holds all of the cards compared to what you have. So it's best to leave that alone and move on to the next point.
And just a final point before we leave the first tour of Vietnam, which I need to say was a full year.
Yes.
You were out there from March 66 to March 67. Just going back to small arms fire, which is what you said you experienced most. How much have you actually ever seen a helicopter take small arms fire? I mean, so you have your windscreen shot out, okay? You've had your bubble, was it at the front? It's underneath.
Yes.
This is where you're looking through your feet, isn't it? When you're auto-rotating and you're going down, you go, yeah, we're going down there because the engine doesn't work anymore.
Right.
I mean, how much have you seen one shot at and still come back?
Well, actually, yeah, and on more than one occasion, you know, I had taken fire, and the Huey is in comparison to today's aircraft and helicopters, it was rather primitive because it just the nature of it, and the way because it was originally designed as a medical evacuation helicopter, never designed to go into combat and face to face with the enemy. So it has. I was surprised when I would get back and I would see holes in my aircraft or my rotor system, and the aircraft was still flying just beautifully. If you took a round in the hydraulic system, you know, then it became a bit of a problem because you could still control it, but it was very, very difficult. And you use your natural instinct. Let's get this thing. Excuse me. Let's get this thing on the ground as soon as possible, because the ground fire. If you took a round in the engine, that would usually that slowed you down quite a bit, and you would have to put it on the ground. But if you were hit in just about any other place other than the direct hit on the engine, it would still keep on flying.
So it was quite a tough beast, really. It would take quite a lot.
Well, yeah, I put it down a couple of times, and I must say. Not necessarily because of my own piloted skills, but we were able to get it on the ground and not bend anything, and then we had aircraft that they could sling load the helicopter out underneath the Chinook and take it back for maintenance to fix and fly another day. But one particular time I was loaded to the gills. I had a pretty good amount of fuel on board. I had all the seats were occupied. We were coming out of a fairly confined area because we were picking up new personnel for our unit from the replacement station. And I guess I was about, probably maybe 3 or 4 kilometers away of this 25 or 30 kilometer flight up to Cu-Chi, and my hydraulics went out because of ground fire, and so I was like, well, I wanted to put it down in a safe area, and when you lose the hydraulics on a Huey, the system will still fly with the system of bell cranks and push-pull levers, but it's very, very, very heavy on the control stick. So I and my co-pilot, we both got on the cyclic, and we actually double gripped it, and we're guiding it down to a landing area, and so we were in descent, going to put it on the ground, and I remember in this particular area was a South Vietnamese trading area for motor vehicles, for trucks, and I said, well, be careful, there might be some telephone wire, and about that time, just as we were 100 feet from the ground, 50 feet from the ground, all of a sudden there's this telephone wire across it, and then, if you tangle up with the telephone wire, it doesn't fly very well. Let's put it that way. So we both of us pulled back on the cyclic up over the top of these telephone wires, flared, set it down. Textbook landing. Didn't bend anything, and of course these young soldiers that we were carrying in the back, I said, well, just relax. We went ahead and shut the aircraft down, I said, yeah, there'll be somebody here to get us, and we'll get rescued shortly. And they were all like, you know, eyes as big as saucers. And they said, they kind of like, is this the way this combat goes? I said, yeah, well, you know, hey, look at, sometimes stuff happens.
I love your way with words. If you're flying a helicopter in a combat zone and the hydraulics have been shot out by small arms fire and you're having to put it down where you can, it doesn't fly very well if it gets entangled with telephone wires.
Yes.
That is absolutely stone cold magic, Jack Kempster, I tell you. So, March 67, back to the United States, and you've done a year in Vietnam, and you're at Hunter Army Airfield in Georgia, Department of Tactics, yes. And I think, yeah, we start to get involved here with the Cobra, and I ain't going to steal your thunder. So start at the beginning and tell us about being on the ramp.
I was assigned to be the Gunnery Section Chief for the training of new Cobra pilots. Before the Cobra at that time was only being deployed to Vietnam, and so we were the training base for the Cobra. Well, of course, what we were doing is we had to set up I had to set up the school and set up all the lesson plans and everything for the weapon systems, because I was the gunnery guy, and so we had the rockets, the chin bubble, the chin firing turret, and all other armament systems on the aircraft were my responsibility to teach the young aviators as they came through this school how to use them. Well, of course, there's a lot of preamble to that before the first aircraft arrived, and so when the first Cobra arrived, being flown by, I was working for at the time Colonel Kerrigan, who was the head of the Department of Tactics for this element, and I was working, and the colonel in charge was Colonel Wright, and the first Cobra, number one, for the training of future aviators to fly the Cobra, came in, and we'd been told, hey, he's going to show up at such a time, so we wanted to be down on the tarmac to greet him with the appropriate fanfare as he landed, and he came in, and he and an instructor pilot were flying the Cobra, and came down and landed, and we all congratulated him, and had our first look. To me, it was my first look at an actual real live Cobra, AH-1G model, and because I had been going, I'd visited the factory that made the gunnery systems and learned all about the ins and outs, walked the production line where they were making these gunnery systems, and so I was aware of the gun systems on it, but had never actually seen or heard or an actual AH-1 attack helicopter, because that was so new for the Army, because prior to that we'd only had utility and cargo helicopters, never had an attack aircraft. And
yeah, I'll just jump in here, because you've done a beautiful job of ruining another question, and I love the way that you do this, because it's making things a lot easier from my point of view. AH-1 attack helicopter.
Yes.
The AH is, and this is a departure for the US Army, because before this there was no such thing as a helicopter that had been designed from scratch in the attack role.
Right.
The Huey had been adapted to become a gunship, but the Cobra was designed to be a gunship right from the get-go.
Yes, sir.
You've seen the weapon systems that are going in to the Cobra. When do you first get the chance to fly it?
The delivery of aircraft were fairly quick after that number one aircraft came in, and maybe within 2 to 3 weeks we started receiving 2 and 3 Cobras a day for the fleet that we would be trading in, and we ended up with, I believe, a total of 12 Cobras to do our training for the well, first of all, teaching the aviators the difference between flying a Huey and flying a Cobra, because, as you say, one was a utility cargo helicopter that had certain flight characteristics and certain airspeeds and certain characteristics of that we knew very, very well. But the Cobra was a brand new piece of equipment that had, in many ways, quite different flight characteristics than a standard Huey, because of the fact that it was a very thin aircraft. If anybody is aware of what a Cobra or an Apache looks like, they're actually a very thin aircraft from a perspective of compared to the wide body of a Huey. So therefore, they had higher speeds. They were much more agile, and of course, then you strapped a whole bunch of ordnance, rockets and miniguns and other types of weaponry on that airframe to make it a fearsome competitor on the battlefield.
I mean, the manufacturers were very clever, because I think I'm right in saying that there were quite a few interchangeable, although completely different fuselage, completely different flight characteristics, there were interchangeable parts between the Cobra and the Huey. Didn't it have the same tail rotor and the same engine as a Huey?
Actually, it was the same series of engines, but it was an upgraded engine on the Cobra. It was made by Bell Helicopter Company, by the way, as well as all Hueys were made by Bell Helicopter Company in Texas. And the Cobra had a different main rotor system, completely different design rotor system, and a completely different tail rotor system. So in the sense of interchangeable parts, there were not very many interchangeable parts on between a Huey and a Cobra.
Well, that's my research gone out the window. Because I've read somewhere that it had the same tail rotor system. Maybe it was internally there was some similar parts, but okay, an engine upgrade. And what had you, when you were doing this training, what had you gathered? What had you learned in Vietnam in that first combat tour that helped you to train? Because you wrote this, I mean, let's not underplay this. You wrote the syllabus, didn't you, for
Yes, sir.
training the first US Army pilots in firing, using the weapon systems on the Cobra. So let's not underplay this. What had you learned in Vietnam that helped you to write that syllabus?
The focus was to understand the major difference between the gun systems that we had used in the Huey, and which were basically converted M60 machine guns into a gun that was a rotating barrel, like a Gatling gun, to refer back to the Civil War, an old Gatling gun, 7.62 millimeter, in the nose, under the nose of the aircraft, that was controlled electrically by the individual sitting in the front seat. In essence, it was a tandem helicopter, 2-person, and the front seat guy was the weapons guy, and the back seat was the pilot. It was actually flying the aircraft. However, both had access to controls, And one of the things was interesting about the control system. The controls in the back seat for the flying was very, very similar to the Huey, with a collective and with a cyclic and the pedals. Now in the front seat, yes, he had a collective and a cyclic and pedals, but they were sidearm, so that the cyclic was on the right-hand side and the collective was on the left-hand side, but they were mounted into the side walls of the aircraft rather than being between your legs like they are in a for the guy flying in the back seat. So flying a Cobra was, in that essence, different, because just the placement of your hands, your brain is trained to be, you have your hands in a certain position for flying the aircraft. And when you move your hands off to the side for sidearm controllers, which are very popular nowadays in the jet aircraft and jet fighters, there was a whole new way to teach individuals how to do that. In addition, as I said, the Cobra was much more agile than a Huey, so therefore it could turn faster, it could go faster in straight and level flight, and even though it was heavily armed and weighted down with all that ammunition and rockets and things, it was still pretty darn agile compared to a Huey. So that's because of the design of the rotor system, which is a much larger, much more lift was generated by the rotor system in a Cobra than in a Huey. That was a long lead into what did I learn that was I could transplant into my students that were learning, was the necessity for absolutely being on top of the maintenance and because normally a flight crew loads their own aircraft. They're not loaded by somebody else on the ground. When you're loading your aircraft and you're loading your linked machine gun ammunition, or you're loading your rockets, you do that. That's the way the Army operated, rather than having a ground crew load the rockets on for you like they do in the Air Force.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I assumed. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So
I assumed that you flew your helicopter back to base, got out, and said, "Fuel her up, put some ammunition in the aircraft," and then it wasn't the Royal Air Force, obviously.
No, it was to be aware of the what it needs, what it takes to maintain that system in working order properly, to know where the what things to look for as clues to, hey, this is about to break, or this is about my gun is going to jam if I don't do this. If I'm not careful about certain things, make sure that you understand how the system works, what are its, because every system has its foibles. There's nothing perfect, and to understand that that's what's going to keep you alive is to properly load the ammunition and the rockets into your aircraft, to properly understand, does something need to be greased? Does something need to be changed before you take off? That's what I try to impart to my students, is the importance of properly maintaining, just like an infantryman an infantryman sleeps with his rifle, okay? It becomes his partner. Well, that helicopter is your partner. And when you of course you can't sleep with your helicopter, but understand that you must, the care and feeding thereof is so important.
I should imagine at some point somebody has probably slept with their helicopter, metaphorically speaking, whether they wanted to or not. So you were loading your own belts, you were loading your own rockets.
Yes.
Into your own aircraft.
Yeah.
And presumably there were some kind of technicians there that you could look at something and go, well, that ain't right, and I know it's not right.
Right.
But I'm not going to fix the rocket, but I'll give it back to the armourer or whatever and say, look, I was loading up my aircraft and I have spotted this and I'm not happy. So have that back, and can you sort it out and give me one that works, please?
Right. And in addition, not only another salient point that I was able to pass on to the students was to inform them of how we attacked targets in Vietnam when I was flying the Huey gunship, which became slightly different with the faster speed and the more weapons carrying and the agility of the Cobra. That all it did was enhance the air to ground performance of that aircraft, and about the importance of never overfly your target. Make sure that you have your clearance to fire, because even then we were trying to instill into the air crews that they were about to go into combat. But there are rules for combat, rules of engagement. Don't violate the rules of engagement. If you do, there will be. I'll use the phrase, there'll be hell to pay, because the rules of engagement were very, very clear.
For non-pilots like myself, and I suppose I should have asked you this earlier, really, but you've mentioned it now so many times, and I can tell it's been instilled into you. Why should a pilot in that scenario never overfly the target? Is it simply because you will be immediately above it, and that's the easiest shot that they've got with small arms fire? That would, yeah. Is that it?
Spot on. Yes, because because even though you may have been shooting rockets and machine gun fire at the enemy combatant, if you don't put him out of commission, when you overfly, all of a sudden he realizes that you are now vulnerable to his ground fire, and so therefore he can pop up out of his hiding place and start shooting at you as you overfly. So never overfly the target.
Right. Well, there's a story here about flying with a warrant officer to Stuart, which I'd like to cover before we get on to the next section. So, because we're very soon going to be going back into Vietnam, but this is a new Vietnam. For all intents and purposes, things have moved on. So if you could just tell me about the time you were flying with the warrant officer. It says to Stuart, for those people that may or may not know, this is where is Stuart?
Yes, our aircraft for the training purposes were stationed at Hunter Army Airfield. However, the firing ranges were about 20 kilometers away at Fort Stewart, Georgia. And so therefore, every day I would fly an aircraft out, because Colonel Kerrigan was out there. He was physically at Stewart, and I was physically at Hunter Army Airfield where I was living. So I would take an aircraft for because he would go out. He was supervising the conversion of tank gunnery ranges into aircraft gunnery ranges as we were changing the landscape and making the ranges proper for aircraft, not just for tanks. So one day, as we were flying out, it was very, very foggy, very, very low ceiling. But within the helicopter world, we're going slow enough that we can be in a very, very thick fog, and still, as long as we have enough visibility for safety purposes, we can get to our location. Well, we were flying along fairly low level, because keeping track of the ground, and heading due west from Savannah, Georgia area where Hunter is located, over to Fort Stewart. And I knew we were south of the airfield, and there was a beacon on the airfield that I could watch, and I knew that there was a power line, a high tension power line that fed Fort Stewart from the south. That would be right across our flight path. Well, those towers, we were below the level of the top of those towers. So I was watching on my radio navigation systems where that beacon was. And as we approached, I knew we were due south of that beacon, which meant we were heading due west. when it's off my right wing, I know I can turn and I can head for Fort Stewart. And we were using what we called an ADF, automatic direction finding. Well, our ADF system could automatically point to the station if there's a strong enough signal. If there's not a strong enough signal, you had to manually move the seeking antenna, the sensing antenna, to determine where the radio station was actually located. Well, I was moving the antenna back and forth manually, and about that time I realized that, okay, it's right at my right. But I told him, I said, turn north, right turn, right now. And he said, why? I said, now. About that time, as we were banking to the right to go from heading west to heading north, the towers for the high tension line came out of the fog, and we paralleled those power lines all the way up to Fort Stewart. So and he asked me, he said, well, how did you know those towers were out there? I said, well, number one, I know that when you're exactly south of that beacon, that's about where those towers are. And so therefore, when I saw that we were exactly south of that beacon from Fort Stewart, that we best turned and started heading north, because those power lines would be in our flight path. So
how close do you think you got?
Probably less than 100 meters. And we were traveling at about 60 miles an hour.
I'm sure somebody will work out that 60 miles an hour, 100 meters being, I don't know, 325, 330 feet, something like that. Somebody will do the maths.
At 60, you're doing 88 feet per second, so...
Well, you've done it for me. Thanks very much. Right. Okay, I'm going to embarrass somebody here, because this isn't strictly related to flying aircraft. 19th of February 1968. This has got nothing to do with aircraft, and he's on the camera. So Edward appears.
Yes.
Child number 2. This has got no relation to Ted, as we know him. But on the 27th of February 1968, Walter Cronkite is on national television, and he speaks to the people of America and says basically, at best, we have a stalemate in Vietnam. Now, he gets the credit for being the guy that did that. I've read somewhere that about 3 weeks earlier, somebody suggested basically the same thing in the Washington Post, and apparently Lyndon B. Johnson said, well, if I've lost Walter Cronkite, I've lost Middle America. And whether or not he said that, I don't know. There's some controversy over that. But you're at home. You're on home soil at this point. That's cited as being the moment that America started to realise that Vietnam is, to put it mildly, not going very well. Were you aware of that? Were you affected by that, or are you just too busy with a 1-year-old son and having a military career, and you haven't really got time to watch television? I mean, what was the general feeling back home? How did you feel at that point? Because you've been in Vietnam for a year and you've come back, and do you remember that moment? Do you remember that sort of that fallout from that interview, or was it just one of those things where you're just too busy being Jack Kempster and being in the military? Just explain that to me. What was the general feeling by '68 about Vietnam?
Well, in my small world, his comment didn't mean very much to me, because yes, that was his right to make that observation. I didn't agree with that observation. I felt that it was a matter of, and I think it's been proven that though he may have felt that way, that the General Giap, G-I-A-P, who was the commander-in-chief, if you will, or the military officer in charge of the North Vietnamese forces that were fighting the war, he was, at that time, he was almost ready to give up because he was being pounded by the American and South Vietnamese forces and being decimated in many ways to where he was almost ready to say, okay, I'm going to throw in the towel. So the landscape that I saw was driven by my experiences of battlefield successes, not battlefield failures. And I must say that the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese soldiers that I saw were just as dedicated to their cause as American and South Vietnamese soldiers were to our cause. So therefore, it's two competing forces, and sometimes you win and sometimes you don't.
Yeah, I didn't really expect that answer. I didn't know what to expect, but I thought I've got to ask you about this because it is a moment that's attributed to America supposedly realizing that they may not win in Vietnam, but I'm really interested to hear what you had to say about that. Your time at Hunter, it runs on to May '69. Now it's back to Vietnam again, this time for a slightly shorter tour. Your 665th Transportation Corps Detachment in direct support of the 361st Aviation Company Escort, the Pink Panthers. What exactly were the Pink Panthers, Aviation Company Escort? Tell us about that.
It was a Cobra company. They were equipped with the AH-1G Cobra, and the 665th TC, or Transportation Corps Detachment, was direct support and maintenance of that unit, which was normally a unit that had Hueys was just supported by a maintenance company that would work on all kinds of aircraft, whereas we in the 665th only worked on Cobras, only worked to keep them flying, and as their maintenance unit, and we were dedicated to them. We did not work for any other unit, any other aviation element in Vietnam. We were solely dedicated to their support.
And this is a very, very, very different situation for the first time, because you are providing air overwatch for insertion and extraction of long-range recon patrols into Cambodia.
Yes, that is correct.
So presumably, did you see more? Did you come under fire more the second time in Vietnam? Was it hotter for you the first time or the second time?
Well, being a maintenance guy, we normally would lay back while the Cobras were out fighting the fight, and we would only come in if there was damage to a Cobra, they had to put it on the ground, or they needed to limp back, and we would maybe follow them back in case they had to put it on the ground in friendly territory to help them survive. And that was the first time where I had seen and was exposed to the, as I mentioned earlier, the ZSU 23-4, a four-barreled 23mm anti-aircraft mounted on tracked vehicles when we were along the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Cambodia, watching the North Vietnamese troops move down with their air cover, or their anti-aircraft cover. And yes, that was an interesting experience in the fact that, of course, there were still small arms from the enemy combatants, but there was something new in this very high-powered anti-aircraft weapon that was very impressive.
Were they using tracer?
Yes,
because presumably they'd need to see where their rounds were falling, and You know, so presumably you'd get there would be an element of tracer in there, which of course you're seeing coming up at you.
Right. Their tracers were a kind of an orangish color, and our tracers were basically red. And so therefore, when you saw orange tracers coming towards you, you knew it was those guys firing at you, and not somebody from a friendly unit firing indiscriminately.
And it's also mentioned as well that there's a story here about Nixon, isn't there? But because, go on about Nixon, and okay. there's no troops in Cambodia.
Right. We had a very major lift of probably 15 or 20 Hueys loaded with troops that crossed over into Cambodia, and that was kind of like in the morning. And about 5 or 6 hours later, we got called again for another escort mission for more Hueys to go into Cambodia and bring the ground troops out. And we're going like, well, we just put them in. What's going on? So off we went, our Cobras escorting the Hueys in, and loaded up the guys, the infantry soldiers on the ground, loaded them up and brought them back into South Vietnam and landed. And we said, that's really kind of strange, but whatever, I'm not in charge. I'm just out here doing my job. And it turns out that the very next morning, we were listening to Armed Forces Radio, and the president was making an announcement from the White House. And he said, we have no combat soldiers in Cambodia, blah, blah, blah. And I'm going like, oh, I see. Yeah. And so once he finished his speech, it was true. He was true. There were no American combat soldiers in Cambodia at that time. He finished his speech. Later that afternoon, we loaded up another 20 Hueys worth of people and flew back across the border into Cambodia, escorted them over to put forces back into Cambodia.
War and politics are always inextricably linked.
Yes.
So you weren't just in support of maintenance. You were also flying combat missions yourself.
Yes. As the commander of a maintenance unit, it was my primary mission was to maintain the aircraft that we were supporting. However, also being a second tour combat aviator, I occasionally got called upon to fly missions in the Cobra because I was Cobra qualified, and was well aware of, because of my time with the Gunnery Section, I was well aware of the systems on board the aircraft, perhaps more so than just one of the other aviators that had been trained in the Cobra and had come over and was using it daily in combat. So yes, it wasn't very often, but it was part of my job. If I had to do it, I did it.
There's something else that comes up here. Ted mentioned it earlier on, so I don't mind referencing him, because I'm going to ask you. He mentioned the name of the LRRPs, the Long Range Reconnaissance Patrols. Mm-hmm. What they were the pre-runners to, what did you mention there, Ted? I don't mind if you say it, right, and bring it in.
It's the primary warriors that were a combination of advisors as well as ground soldiers, were a MACV, Military Assistance Command, Vietnam, SOG, Special Operations Group. And they were Green Berets that had been assigned to do what Green Berets do, and that's train friendly forces to be military performers, and also, unfortunately, at times engage in combat themselves.
So they were going into Cambodia to engage in combat with the North Vietnamese army, And were they helping to train people in Cambodia as well, or presumably they weren't?
No, they were basically training the South Vietnamese to operate in Cambodia as part of the overall forces that were attempting to save South Vietnam.
Okay. Just away from aviation for a moment, we mentioned earlier on about war crimes and this isn't that, but you were now, as a major, you were put in a bit of a position, weren't you? Because it's coming to the end of 1969 and we're going to mention drugs, because there was a problem, wasn't there? Which was obviously not of your making, but the buck stops with the major, perhaps. Tell us about that, because it got quite nasty.
Yes, there was, drugs were plenty available to the soldiers in Vietnam. I don't know through what network, how they did that, whether the enemy contributed. I have a hunch that was partly contributed to the enemy, that they saw this a way to weaken the American forces. Yes, there was a drug problem in the American Army. I don't know about the Air Force or the Navy, but I know that within the Army there were drug problems. As a unit commander, I had been threatened by unnamed, anonymous soldiers because of the fact that I wouldn't stand for no nonsense. I was kind of a no nonsense kind of guy, and therefore, when soldiers violated, in my view, their oath to be a good citizen and a good soldier, that I did not take kindly to that, and so therefore my enforcement of the drugs and the use of drugs, I felt impinged upon and violated the oath of office that we all took as both officers and enlisted men to be, support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And domestic. And it did not matter to me where we were. We were in the States, we were in Vietnam, Germany, wherever we were, that ethic, that ethos was topmost in my mind.
Did you ever have to court-martial anybody?
Yes. Yes, I did. And those aren't pleasant moments, because I looked at that soldier. He was one of my men. I trusted him. He trusted me, and he violated that trust. And so therefore, I was disappointed. But at the same time, I guess I was compassionate in the idea of, you've ruined your life doing what you're doing, and you have made my life a living hell. So therefore, we're not going to. We will have to part company. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but you've got a job to do, haven't you, Jack? And you've got to do it, because if you don't do your job, you're not doing your part of the chain, and you're letting the army down. And he's already let the army down. Yes. So you've now got to be the major. But from a personal level, you didn't feel, it wasn't a vindictive thing, and you didn't feel, presumably, you didn't get any pleasure out of that at all, I can tell.
No, none whatsoever.
You are now in the, here's a mouthful, the Consolidated Repairables Accumulation Point Program.
That Consolidated Repairables Accumulation Point was towards the end of my second Vietnam tour, and again, these are very valuable aircraft parts that we could send back to the States, to the depot. They could rebuild them, refurbish them, and they could be used again on an aircraft. And it's just lots of stuff. And I was responsible for putting together a program to gather all this up, make sure that it got put in proper safety containers and other things so they wouldn't be damaged in transit, and sent back to the States. Meanwhile, every good program has to have an acronym. So, NATO, and other things where we put 3 or 4 letters together to symbolize what that program was about. So I said, listen, this is a lot of, well, I'll use the word. This is a lot of crap that we're sending back to get fixed so we can use it again. So how about consolidated repairables accumulation point? And everybody said, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I ran it up the tape to get it officially named as that. And I got through a couple of layers of colonels, but I got to a general officer. I don't remember who it was, but he said, "No, wait a second, wait a minute. I read that acronym. I don't think we need to do that." I said, "Oh, darn. All right. Oh well."